sailoring. Ain't got no trailer for sailoring. Give man a man by no man. Give the road.
Hey everyone, Jackson with Edible Garden Growers here, and this is your detailed guide to everything pepper feeding. We're going to be talking about how to feed, when to feed, and why you should feed, along with addressing some common misconceptions that tend to float around the pepper growing community. So without wasting any more time, let's get into it. So I know as we get later into the season, it gets easy to start putting things off in the garden because it can become a bit demanding, but feeding is not one of those things that you're going to want to put off. As you can see, these guys are starting to lose their dark green color. They're yellowing up a little bit, and they're not looking nearly as excited as these guys over here that still have their dark green color. So I waited a little bit too long to feed on these guys. I fed them about a week or so ago, and you can see the new growth is coming in nice and dark green and healthy, but the plant is playing catch up a little bit and is not thriving as much as it could. So I recommend feeding every 2 to 3 weeks or so, or at the first sign of any sort of deficiency that you're experiencing if you want to optimize your plant health. So you can see these guys are pretty excited. They're putting out loads of flowers and just overall thriving for the most part. So definitely stay on top of your feeding schedule and do not put that off. So when I was new to gardening and growing peppers in general, I'd only get, one or a handful of peppers per plant, and it'd be pretty discouraging putting a whole season's worth of effort into these plants for pretty measly returns. So I want to help you guys that are in that same situation avoid those issues. As I was mentioning earlier, you want to feed every 2 to 3 weeks, especially during the summer, during the early season when things are a little bit smaller. You can get away with less frequent or lighter feedings. But once your plants are full on growing, you're going to want to give them exactly what they want. Otherwise, you're going to be limiting yourself, limiting the plants, and limiting your yields. So if you want to see upwards of 100 or more peppers per plant, I'm going to show you what I do to get those kinds of yields. And this applies to, if you're just growing one plant or a handful of plants or a couple hundred plants like me. So let's get to it. So when mixing up nutrients, I use a 600-gallon IBC tote. I usually only fill it 100 or 200 gallons or so. And just because I'm doing that doesn't mean this information won't be relevant to people that are just mixing up nutrients in a 5 or 10-gallon tank. That's what I did for years. I'd use one of these little measuring cups that you should be able to find at maybe even the kitchen section of a grocery store or your garden center. Just something to use to be able to mix up your nutrients. If you're wanting to scale up from a 5-gallon bucket, hopefully the way I do things can inspire some ideas in how you want to do things. My setup is a little bit on the pricier end, but as much as I love gardening, I also love convenience. And when my garden takes too much time to water or feed, that's when I start to lose interest in it. So hopefully this information is relevant to you guys regardless of your scale. And if you're wanting to scale up, hopefully this information gives you some ideas as to how you can scale up. All right, we're currently filling up the IBC tote up to 100 gallons to be able to water the front and backyard. So when it comes to fertilizing peppers, you are wanting an even NPK, which is these numbers right here. N stands for nitrogen, P stands for phosphorus, and the K stands for potassium. It's a pretty common misconception that people believe you want to use a high nitrogen fertilizer in the front end when your plants are young, and then use a higher P and K when they get to the flowering stage. This myth comes from the cannabis growing realm, where during the first part of the weed plant's life, it's going to be putting all of its energy into foliage production, which is triggered by the nitrogen, so that first number right there. And then when it gets to the point of bud formation, it stops putting energy into its green growth. It stretches out for its first couple weeks, and then it puts all of its energy into bud formation, stops putting out fan leaves and all that stuff, and it starts putting energy into forming buds. The P and the K are going to be helpful in that bud formation, but peppers are not like that. They might not be flowering right off the bat, but the entire time they're putting out flowers and fruit, they're still putting out foliage, they're still putting out green growth. Watch your pepper plant throughout the season. It's not going to stop putting out leaves once it starts putting out pods. So you want to be using an even NPK from start to finish. This is even recommended by Johnny's Research Farm, which has been doing research on vegetables for many decades. So I think the people that have been doing this for a long time know what they're doing. And A lot of people that I see putting out really good yields are also recommending the same thing. So I've been doing the same thing myself, and I've been noticing increased results and yields and growth and whatnot from using an even NPK. Even though I've got a bloom fertilizer here, which has got this 233, it's still pretty even, but it's not 100% perfect. So if you can't find something that's even, try and find a couple bottles that will make it so that way you can even them out. So this bottle right here, the Bloom Fertilizer by Growth Science Organics, its application rate is 1/2 ounce per gallon. This guy is 1 ounce per gallon. So we have a 233 here. We have a 511 right here. So if you take this guy and cut it down to 1/4 of its ratio, you'll have 1.25, 0.25, 0.25. You add that to this, you're gonna have 3.25, 3.25, 3.25. And so that comes out as a perfect even NPK. It doesn't need to be that close, but this just so happens to work out pretty well. This Humic tonic, it's a humic acid. It's definitely not necessary, but it definitely helps your plants if you can use something like that. What it's going to be doing is upping your plant's immune system. It's going to help keep harmful toxins at bay, and then it also helps with nutrient uptake into the plant, just to name a couple of things. I recommend looking into humic acid. It's a really helpful thing for the plants. And so once you add all of this to the water, it's going to result in your pH getting pretty low, probably somewhere in the 2.5 to 4.5 range. I think I usually get somewhere around 3.5 is my pH. And your plants do not absorb nutrients super well at that rate. If you've got some pretty healthy soil, the plant has buffer mechanisms that'll make it so you can apply something like that, and the plant will be able to uptake it. But just to reduce the work that the soil microbes and the plant has to do to be able to uptake that, I recommend trying to get your pH as close to 6.5 as you possibly can. This is the optimal range for the most uptake of nutrients. Nutrients have different uptake ranges. You know, some are uptaken in the higher pH, some are uptaken in the lower pH, and the Goldilocks zone is going to be 6.5. That's not for all plants. It's for a lot of plants, but not all. Like acid-loving plants like blueberries are gonna want something a little bit lower. So I use this Olympus Up. It's a pH up. It is I think it's a lime. Yeah, it's liquid lime by Nectar for the Gods. They've got a great line for cannabis growing if that's something you're into. And then a way to actually register it is you're gonna wanna use something like this. This stuff is real cheap, easy to use. You just stick this guy. I have got it on a metal wire so I can dip it into my tank easier. You fill it up halfway, and you put a couple dropperfuls, not dropperfuls, but a couple drops of this guy into there. You see what color it comes out to, and when you get it to that brownish color, that is when you are in the sweet spot. It can be a little bit hard if you're using a dark nutrient solution and you're going kind of heavy with it to see what the color is, so you kind of just got to use your best guess. It's helpful if you hold it up to the light. It makes it a bit easier to see what's going on. So the way I mix my nutrients together in this big tank is I use these Aero mixers. You need 2 of them if you're gonna do it the way I do it. I love this company. They're based out of Oregon. They do a phenomenal job of doing what they describe themselves as doing. Oh, now my hand's kind of gross. Basically, they are an air pump mixed with a water pump. So you can choose how you want to set it up. It's a water pump regardless of how you do it. It can mix powders and liquid nutrients really efficiently. So I've got one of them that's got this air hose connected to it, and water is going to be cycling through it, and then air comes down through this hose, mixes it in with the water, and it aerates the water pretty well. My other one, I don't have an air hose on it, but I've got my actual feeding hose on it. So the water, instead of getting circulated around the tank, is going to get jetted up into this hose, and then I can use that to water everything in my garden. Oh, it is very important to mix these guys up. The bigger the container, the more you're going to want to shake them. And a quick note, you want to store these guys in not direct sun. You want to keep them inside or in a basement, someplace where it's not going to get hot, especially after you've opened it. All right, so I've got 100 gallons of water in this tank. That would mean if I wanted to do the high-end dosage of 15 milliliters per gallon, I'd be looking at about 50 ounces, but I don't want to use that much because I want to save some of this fertilizer for later. So I'm gonna do about 40 ounces instead. So this guy only goes up to 32, so I'm gonna fill up to 20 twice. Just keep it simple. And that leaves me with enough to get at least one more decent feeding in. Okay, let's see if I can get this down in there to rinse it out. Take my hat off. Okay, good enough. So now I'm gonna go turn these tanks on, let the nutrient solution mix up for a little bit, and then I'm going to take a pH reading and adjust accordingly. That is super red, so that is below 4.0 even, so we gotta bring that up quite a bit. I'm gonna let that go for a little bit to make sure it fully dilutes into the solution. Still high, now it's closer to 5 though. If you're using something that's a little bit stickier in terms of the nutrients, you'll want to wash this guy out between uses, otherwise it can affect the pH by the residuals that stick onto it. Alright, since I gotta keep that pump going, I decided to move inside to film the rest of this just because I didn't want to have to be yelling and have poor audio. So I got the levels just about right. You can see there's a little bit of red there on the bottom. That's because I didn't fully clean it out, so there's just a little bit of sediment from earlier on, but you can see that the rest of the container is sitting right around that 6.5, which is that golden zone that we're looking for there. So now that we've got the pH levels right, we can start watering. And it doesn't matter if you're doing 100 gallons or 5 gallons, all of this applies in the same fashion. So now that I got the pH right, I can go ahead and turn on my second pump, which has got the hose connected to it. I'm not going to use any sort of shower head attachment or anything like that, just because I don't want it to get all clogged up. So I'm just going to be doing a steady stream. I've got an old watering wand that I stick the head off so I can get down underneath the plants quite a bit easier. And I'm going to go up and down the aisles a couple times. I'm not going to just sit on each plant because I'm not trying to just flood one spot and then have it look for whatever crevice the water can get down and then not be utilized by the plant. So I'm going to go do a couple passes on the plants to make sure there's an even distribution of the nutrients getting down into those plants.
Trailer for sailoring. Man, trailer for sailoring. Ain't got no cigarettes, but trailer for sailoring. Give, man, don't pay no. Trailer for sailoring. Trailer for sailoring. Ain't got no trailer for sailoring. Give man me, give a roll.
So my least favorite part of this whole process is cleaning these guys out, and the way that I do it is once I empty the tank out, I fill it with a little bit of water, spray off the walls, and then let it drain out into a bucket because there's still some good nutrient residue. Just empty it out, this little guy right there, and then I use that bucket of diluted nutrient mix to water some other plants. And then I start filling the tank back up. I throw some Dr. Bronner's cast iron soap in there along with some vinegar, and then I turn my pumps back on. The pump that has the hose on it that I use for feeding, I then just stick right back in the opening on top and then just let the water cycle through there. So that way it's cleaning out the tube or the feeding line. And then once that has been going for a little bit, I slowly empty the whole tank out into an area where I don't have any plants growing.
Everything that happens is motivation.
Alright everyone, I appreciate you checking out this vid. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two about growing peppers, and if you're wanting to learn more about the pepper growing process, check out my YouTube channel. I've got more videos on the process, and if you like this content, I'd really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Until next time, stay spicy.
Trailer for sailoring. Rules to let. Trailer for sailoring.